So we want to welcome everyone today. We're so glad you're with us. The Cold War is one of my favorite topics to teach. I was a language arts teacher and I always taught the Cold War with the Crucible. And Dr. Reeser is with us today. Most of you should know Dr. Reeser, but I love her presentations. She always gives us a different take on things and it makes it exciting. So Dr. Reeser has recently retired from EKU, so she's really, really happy to be retired now, and I will turn it over to her and let her educate us.
Okay, let me organize my boxes here so I can have my chat open when I did screen share. And I'm going to turn off my camera just because I'm always afraid I'll overload my, oh darn, let me remember how to do it. I'm always afraid I'll overload my computer. So I'm going to turn me off. And you should see the PowerPoint. Is that working for everybody?
It is.
Okay, so I will officially begin. And yes, I'm going to, I know a lot of you are a long way from retirement, so I hate to say much, but when you get there, do it. It's wonderful. I am living a virtually stress-free life. Even though I'm in lots of projects, they're all of my own choice. And the best part is you don't have to write pointless reports that no one reads. I think that's the part that I enjoy the most. But anyway, so if I'm a little rusty on teaching things because I have avoided the computer almost all summer. And this was the first day since the semester ended that I spent the whole day at the computer. And if it hadn't been cold outside, I probably wouldn't have been ready for today because it's just hard to sit at the computer after you're free from it all the time. So just again, I've got my chat open. So if there's issues or anything, just put it in the chat or if you have questions. And if I can't answer them right that second, then I will do that.
So, and Dr. Reeser, I can watch the chat as well. And I may interrupt, but I don't mean to do so in a rude way.
That is cool. So our topic today is the Cold War, but I'm taking a little different approach. And this is a little different from a lot of my presentations because it's more about teaching ideas and pedagogy and a little less about content. So our sub-theme and one of our essential questions is communist, socialist, capitalist, conservative, and liberal. What does all of that really mean? And let me give you a little bit of background. I did start teaching in the 90s and back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And one year, a few years in teaching US history, I decided to start in the middle because we never got to the 60s that students wanted to learn about. So I started with the Cold War. And that first year I did that, I learned very quickly that the Cold War didn't make sense because students didn't understand what these terms meant: communist, socialist, capitalist, conservative, and liberal. So I thought, okay, I really have to cover these in depth because these 5 concepts are the basis for really modern history and modern politics. Now, we know that there's been a lot of changes in modern politics since the 1990s, but I think these terms are especially relevant today because so many of these are used to mislead people in social media. And I'm sure you've heard people accuse, you've heard someone in social media, either a public figure or a regular person, say, oh, you're a socialist, like you're a serial killer, right? And they say it so awful that everybody assumes it's an awful thing, but they really don't understand what it means. I learned that my students, they might identify as a Republican or Democrat because that's what their family told them they were, but they had no clue what conservative liberal meant. And so the more I started researching, the more I realized I wasn't sure I knew it really well. So I started then the next year really going into these terms really, really in depth. I started that when I was teaching high school. And then every year I've been able to teach some version of these lessons throughout my career at Eastern. And so I want to say I've almost perfected this process with various things. And I think if you start, you could even start the whole year in US history, but it's harder when you go back to colonial and Revolutionary War because we didn't have communist, socialist, and capitalist. Those terms hadn't been invented yet. And conservative and liberal meant very different things when you try to align it to the political party. So it works best when you get up to World War II and the Cold War. So that's a little background. As usual, please don't post this PowerPoint on the internet because I was sloppy attributing some of the sources, and some of the images may be under copyright. And if I go to jail for copyright infringement, I will take you with me. So use it. You can use it in your classroom, but don't post it on the general internet, and don't try to show the whole PowerPoint to students in one day. And actually, this is more about things you can use to teach. And you'll see in our folder today, there's a lot of items there. So I'll try to address all those, but you don't have to worry about looking at all those right now.
And the folder is linked on that agenda, just so that you know where to find that.
Yeah. So hopefully you did the preview quiz. Just hold up your hand if you've seen that before with the little Zoom thing. Do a Zoom hold up your hand if you've done that Pew Research political topology quiz before. I see someone hasn't, and you can use that little hand holding up thing. I think I can see that, or maybe not. Either one. I love this. Pew Research is one of the best neutral resources that I've found for many up-to-date issues. They do all sorts of polls about attitudes of Americans towards religion. It's reliable. They're not, crazy liberal, crazy conservative, either spectrum. And they actually have updated this as political situations and examples change, they update this. And this is a brand new thing where you see the arrow. You can set this up for a group quiz. So you can have everyone in your class take this. And I haven't done this before. This is brand new since I retired. And you could have your whole class take it. And I'm assuming it's going to show you a chart, but it doesn't tell who each student is. Because I've always had my students do a quiz like this. Before this one came out, I did that political compass one. And the students, I would give them a chart and students would put a dot on there where they were. And then I would project it. So I didn't know who the dots were. I just could show the class, this is where we fall on this spectrum, right? So that would be pretty cool. Unless you suspect you have like two really, really, really liberal people and all the rest really conservative, and then you might get some hard feelings. I don't know. Let me just say, folks, teaching in high school and the political climate in the 90s would be a whole lot different than doing it today. And college students are more restrained, but I always worked really hard to be neutral myself. And encourage students to talk about these things in a polite way. But, you use your judgment based on your students. But what I would do is, now I'll tell you in a minute where I put this in sort of the lesson plan idea I'm presenting. I did not start with this quiz, though. I just started it with you to get us started off. And I didn't do the group quiz. So anyway, keep this in mind. We'll come back to it. So our essential questions are communist, socialist, capitalist, conservative, and liberal. What do these words mean? Because it sets up everything really in the World War II, post-World War II, Cold War, 20th century, and into the 21st century. All these words are still relevant today. And our second question is the Cold War over? Now, I don't deal with that too much in this presentation, but at the end, we'll look at some questions related to that. So this is a part I developed when I was teaching. We called it Interdisciplinary Social Studies for Elementary Teachers. And I had all the elementary teachers that came through EKU. And this was a social studies content course. And I was supposed to concentrate on economics and world history. And you think, oh my God, those are weird things to tie together. But I used sort of an economic spectrum like this. So the very first day of class, this was one of the key themes in my class. And I said, here's an economic continuum. And, continuum's like a number line. And there's two sides to it. The government should help individuals in a society succeed. And as you can see on the chart, that's more on the left and liberal side. Or on the opposite end is economic responsibility is the responsibility of the individual. And that's generally on the right or more conservative side. And so students, they probably never seen it addressed this way before. And you notice I did not put political parties in there because I don't want to go there yet when I first introduced this. And as we know, political parties can shift. So one of the first activities we did is we did a 3-tab foldable. Remember Dinah Zik, Z-I-K, came out with all those books, and now you see them all the time. So this was on a PowerPoint, or when it was online, I put it online. So here's a picture on how to do a 3-tab foldable, and they would make 2 of these. And it was a way for them to visualize, and I love foldables because, you know, they're like interactive, crafty note-taking guides. So this was a way for them to visualize these 2 sides of the economic spectrum, because these 2 sides are going to form the basis of our discussion for capitalism, socialism, and communism. And they're also going to form our basis for discussing economic issues for conservatives and liberals, right? So it's the sort of the underlying background of both of those sets of concepts. So here's the foldable they would make. So this would be on the solid side of the hot dog foldable, right? These would be the 3 flaps, and this would be inside. And so they would literally, you know, even in college, I'd say, copy this. But this is, I know you all have seen this, the basic economic problem. This is in all the Council of Economic Education materials. This is, you know, the basic economic lessons that we all start out with, K-12. And but the thing is, it's the free market view. It's more the conservative right free market view. And the concept, and this is straight from their materials, human needs and wants are unlimited, but resources are scarce. Therefore, what is the best use of limited resources? And that question is based on these 3 assumptions. What is supposed to be produced? And it's individuals and companies that produce it, right? Hint, not the government. How will it be produced? Well, individuals and companies decide how it will be produced. And who gets it? Well, individuals and companies have to have the money to buy or consume the stuff that's produced. So then I would say, well, open up your foldable, and remember the underlying idea here is the more conservative side, free trade, right? Government does not regulate the economy. Individuals are on their own. So I'd give some examples, you know. So let's say that you need medical care, and doctors are going to produce that service for you, and they're going to decide what they're going to provide, and you have to have the money to buy it. And the government's not going to intervene. That's free trade, right? So we will go through some, you know, Walmart's a company. They decide what they're going to sell. They decide who they're going to buy things from to sell. They set the prices. So that's one of the basic ideas that you see in all the economic curriculums. But here is the other side. And this is the economic problem reinterpreted. And we'll call it the mixed economy view, or it could be a more extreme communist view, right? This is the other side. This is the more liberal side of economics. And the concept here is that resources are unequally distributed in most economies. In other words, there's rich people, there's poor people, and there's people in between. As a result, individuals and households, and you know, in economics, most figures are based on the household, people living together, pooling the resources. Individuals and households face different choices based on income and wealth. In other words, if you're rich, you can buy a lot more stuff than if you're poor. So the questions or the statements that underlie this concept is, one of them is, it's not okay for some people to be really, really wealthy while other people do not have their basic needs met. And I define basic needs, and this is generally accepted today in today's world. Now, it used to be like food and shelter, because before, you know, early 1900s, medical care wasn't worth much, and education. Right? So food, shelter, medical care, and education are the basic needs that we address the most. A second one of these underlying assumptions is a society where people have basic needs is more important than complete economic freedom. In other words, the government ought to give people enough to have their basic needs met and take away a little your economic freedom. So then I say, well, how do they take away your economic freedom, students? And, you know, they might say rules and regulations or taxes, right? Taxes are how the government pay for these services to help people get their basic needs met. And so the third assumption, the government should regulate so that basic needs of every person are met. And then the underlying part that they put inside is the government regulates the economy, so all individuals have their basic needs of life, basic needs. So we start the whole class with this. This is the introduction to this theme. And again, you could do this at different points in different classes. So again, this isn't all one lesson. It fits where, but I'm kind of going in the order I would fit it in. So the next thing we address is a conservative and liberal. What are those two things? So we're this is still related to economics, but they don't know they don't know that yet so much. They might remember that foldable and that one side of that was conservative and one side was liberal. I might say, get out your foldables and look at those. But I want them to think about what they are. And often I'll say, write down to yourself, do you think you're conservative or liberal? Write down for yourself. Don't show me. I'm not interested. I just want you to learn these terms. Are you a Republican or Democrat? So they'll write something down. And then this is the point. Later on in this lesson, I'll have them take the Pew Research quiz. And then I'll say, well, why does it matter? Right? And how is this related to the economy? So these are sort of the guiding questions. Now, if you will look in your agenda, in your folder for today, there's a handout called Liberal Conservative Note-Taking Guide. So the chart and the concepts that I'm going to address here, I give them this whole chart. It's on the note-taking guide. They don't even have to write it down. Saves a lot of time. They have it to refer to later. And then there's also some key terms they have to define. So if you want to use this, there's the chart. And we go back and forth and talk about these two sides, right? Liberals, and again, these are very general statements, folks. And when you get general in a concept that's complicated, there's always something you can argue with, right? But I tried to make it very general so it can apply over decades of American history. So liberals generally believe in progress and change. They're generally open to new values or newer institutions or new traditions, right? On the other hand, conservatives prefer the proven values of the past, right? So liberals look more to the future. Conservatives look more to establish institutions or values or traditions of the past. The next row is I define equality and equity. Now, I know these terms are often used like they are the same word, but they're really not. Equity is equal opportunity. Equality is equal rights. So I give them, here's the definition, right? A liberal is more likely to believe Americans have equal rights, but they also have equal opportunities. And then the other one is you have equal rights, but opportunity is something you have to earn. So for instance, an equity view is everybody should have schooling, Medicare, and a home, or medical care and a home. So our public school system is equity. And I tell you, an even bigger example of equity is special education in our public education system. Special education is not equal, right? We spend a lot more money on special education for individual students than we spend on regular education for individual students, but those students need more help, right? That's equity. Equality means, well, we just spend the same on every student. See? And then I may give an example from the legal system. In American legal system, everybody is equal because everybody's guaranteed a lawyer. You either can pay for your own or you get a court-appointed attorney, right? That's equality. But, that's equality. But aren't some lawyers better than others? So if you're accused of murder, wouldn't you rather have tons of money and get the very best criminal defense lawyer or get the overworked public defender? See, so I give some examples to help them. And public education is one of the best one, and then special education within that. Then we look at the underlying beliefs of those. And generally, conservatives believe that less government is better. In other words, individuals should solve more of their own problems. And you see how that goes back to the economic spectrum. Individuals are responsible for earning their own money and buying their own stuff. Whereas a liberal might say, no, the government needs to help people who need more help. How do we help them? With programs or regulations, and the programs are paid for tax dollars. So a liberal is more likely to have government involvement in your economics, whereas a conservative is more about free market and laissez-faire. And that's a vocabulary term that I introduced, free market. So translation, liberals are usually willing to have more taxes for more services and more regulation if it protects individuals and groups, whereas conservatives want fewer taxes, fewer programs, less government regulation. But again, you're probably thinking examples where that's not always true. So we will look, and this is another economic term, the difference in fiscal and social issues. And I taught fiscal, not PE, physical, but fiscal is economics. And by the way, that is a Latin word that meant basket. And it was your basket of money. So that helps me, I use that. So conservatives don't like that regulation. They'd rather have state and local action. They'd rather have balanced government budgets. The social conservatives, though, favor intervention in some areas. So see, this goes against right here, fewer taxes, fewer programs, less government regulations. Conservatives generally favor regulation in some areas, and they're usually social areas. And then we look at liberals, right? They're in favor of these regulations and taxes to fund programs. But here's one, they're more likely to say, well, people ought to make their own decisions about issues like abortions or gay marriage, and it ought not to be regulated or regulated against. So it helps students to begin to understand that in these, nothing's ever cut and dried all the way. And also that you can mix and match. And I tell students, most people are somewhere in the middle, and most people mix and match liberal and conservative views. It depends on the issue. It really does. So for instance, I might be a fiscal liberal, but I might be a social conservative, right? There's people like that. And then you probably need to go to this in middle and high school now, because Rand Paul, our Kentucky senator, says he's a libertarian. So then you need to define libertarian and authoritarian. And libertarian is very different from a liberal. And again, people don't always understand that. So authoritarian is more like a dictatorship. Libertarian is more about, yeah, the government does very, very little, and you do whatever you want pretty much, but you accept the responsibilities for that, and you don't expect the government to bail you out, right? So a libertarian using today's current events might say, yeah, build a house on the beach in Florida. That's cool with us. But when the hurricane comes, you are on your own, and we are not going to help you build it back, right? So again, libertarian has a bigger place now, especially with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. This is a really good video crash course. I'm not going to show it to you. You may use it in your class already, but on the note-taking guide, we do watch it in class. I love them. They're short, but I'm sure you've noticed that they go so fast that a lot of it goes over the heads of students, even college students. So I do a lot of pausing and explaining or making connections to what we talked about. But the key points that are on the note-taking guide that I want them to get is, where do political ideologies come from? And that is really good in those videos, because, and here's the answers from the video, it comes from your family, and they talk about how different families come up, have different ideologies. They talk about your social group, and a lot of students in the video, these are sort of sub points of social groups, your education and the political conditions of the time you live. And so it's a really good video. And again, I'm trying to layer students' understanding. Does that make sense? I'm trying to present it, reinforce it, present it, reinforce it, present it, and reinforce it. And then throughout the year or the subsequent units, you can present, reinforce. Remember when we did those foldables? Remember when we examined where your ideology comes from? Let's apply that to what we're talking about now. And then this is one of my favorite parts, and I've updated this over the years, but I actually did with this with my high school students. And I give them a quiz. Now, the authoritarian libertarian part I've added, and then you'll look in your folder, one of them is a Word document with the quiz, and one of them is a Word document, oh my God, is a Word document with the answers. So if you want to open the one with the quiz, or you can just look at your screen, go down through that real quick. just for a few minutes and see how you do on that. And if there's, I don't think I got all of them on the screenshot. There's a few more after that, but skim down through there. And if you have any burning questions about any of them, turn on your mic or put it in comments. So we'll take just a minute to do that. Look at number 16, especially. So type an answer. 16, a liberal or a conservative, authoritarian or a libertarian? Anybody want to put an answer in the chat box? Oops, sorry. 16 really could be about any of them except maybe authoritarian. But even an authoritarian government may choose not to restrict abortion.
Most of the responses are libertarian.
Oh, there they are. Yeah, but it could be a conservative, you know, it could be a person that's mostly conservative, but they're social liberal. It could more, we think it's, you're muted, Kay. I don't know if you knew you were. It could be.
I want to know the answer to number 7.
Oh, okay. A nudist. It could be a libertarian. When I originally wrote it, I was thinking a liberal because I did a word analysis and we associated, and I haven't really got to communist yet, but we associated communist with its a root word commune, right? But I'm thinking that's pretty liberal, where you want to share your goods, because communism is definitely on the economic liberal side. Now, there's another couple that I didn't talk about here, but I usually talk about in class. 12 and 13. Robin thinks humans are basically good. They just need a good environment. And Doug thinks humans need a strong government restrictive laws to keep them from acting in bad ways. If you really, really boil the definitions of liberal and conservative down to the very core, even way back to Socrates' time, that's the core of the two. A liberal at their core thinks that if humans have their needs met, they are basically good. And if they're educated well and treated well, they are basically good and will make good decisions. That is ultimately an underlying concept of liberalism. Whereas strong government restrictive laws is, you can even think of it as a religious basis. You know, a religion is strong government and restrictive laws because humans are naturally evil and they need religion to shape them up and get them to the afterlife or make them act good. And so that's a real core of conservatism. Tell me what number 20 is. I don't have it open. Let's see if, maybe I can open it real quick. Somebody asked about number 20. Oh, she's against public education. Oh, that's libertarian. That's libertarian. Even conservatives believe in public education, sort of. Some of them don't, the charter school ones, but sorry, I left that off the answer guide. So you've got the answers and, you know, just shoot me an email. My EKU email doesn't work anymore. They cut that off. But anyway, you've got it at the beginning of the PowerPoint if you have any questions, and you can always customize this. My libertarian statements, because I'm not an expert in libertarianism, I actually copied and pasted them almost word for word from the libertarian platform from their official website. So you'll notice they're a little more detailed because I did not want to get their statements wrong. So that helps again. Again, you're reinforcing those ideas. So this is the point where then I would have the students take this quiz. And remember, at the beginning, they've written down if they think they're a Democrat or Republican, if they think they're a liberal conservative. And so some of them are surprised. Some of them aren't, and some of them don't understand the questions. So after everyone takes the quiz, and they don't show me the results, but I ask them, were you surprised? So I just say, if you turned out to be on the quiz what you thought you would be, raise your hand. And if you, turned out to be something different than you thought you were, raise your hand. So that's all I ask them. And then I actually pull up the quiz and we look at each question and we discuss what it means. And then because I use this in an economics way, I say, is this question related to economics? And even the questions that you think are not, generally there is an economic relationship. So that is something that I added, but I did go through each question and I said, okay, I'm not taking this quiz. So every one of them, I'm just going to answer the first answer. Again, I really try to be neutral and not influence them with my views, which you can probably guess as grown-ups. And then this one puts you on this really cool spectrum 4 ways, but I'll just tell you the questions are really hard on this one for even some college students, especially middle and high school students. And because this, it's aligned more to European issues and politics, so it makes it a little harder. So this one, you would definitely have to explain more of the questions to your students, but it's kind of neat. Yeah, because it puts you on a different kind of spectrum. So the next thing, so we're going back and forth here, right? But students then need to understand these terms: capitalism, socialism, and communism, these economic systems. And again, a lot of people think, oh, these are governments, but they're really not. These aren't really forms of government. This is how an economy is organized: capitalism, socialism, and communism. They're economic terms. So I really stress that. You look in the folder, there's a reading guide that I gave my college students, could easily be adapted and used with high school or middle school students. And because everything's online now and we don't have money for textbooks, it has some online things that they read and then have the reading guide to answer the questions. And then that serves as my note-taking guide. The first thing they read is actually a blog I wrote, and it's on the socialstudies.com website. They have a blog where you can submit blogs, and it's a very simple explanation of those 3 concepts. Because again, it's hard to find a simple explanation. If you Google those words, you'll find stuff all over the place, right? So I thought, I'm going to get this one posted on this blog. And I use that as the first thing they read. And this chart that they fill out at the end, they can use my blog post to fill that out. But as you see, the key difference is communism. They own everything. They regulate everything. Capitalism is supposed to be completely free market. And socialism is somewhere in between. The government owns some things, regulates some things, and individuals and companies own some things, right? So if you think about it, in America, the public school system is socialist because the government owns the public school system, right? They own it. And we talk about how it's different. So this gets them started. They do this before we really go in depth. Then we start looking at the spectrum again. The new words in economics book, they don't use communism, socialism, and capitalism anymore. They use these new phrases: the planned or command economy, mixed economy for socialism, and free market or market economy for capitalism. And then these are the examples most commonly used of countries. But then I talk about, and notice this is the spectrum of mixed or socialist economies. Generally, the United States is considered one of the most free market ones, right? One of the most capitalist ones, but we're mixed. Generally, China, communist China is considered, or North Korea is considered the most communist or command economy, but North Korea probably isn't, but China is mixed today. And then generally the European nations, Britain, they're moving over to our side. Germany is a little less socialist than they used to. The Scandinavian countries are considered the most socialist, but they're mixed, right? So we talk about the economies. This is a chart that I have a jigsaw, and they fill out this chart. And the hardest part here is giving examples of countries. because really everybody's in the mixed category nowadays. Even the United States, we call ourselves capitalist or free market, but we're regulated, we're mixed. And China and Cuba, they're a little mixed. North Korea is probably the most command economy or communist, and the Soviet Union used to be, right? But students really struggle with those examples because they're not cut and dry. They're not yes or no. They're not one or the other. Then I talk a little bit more about the history of communism. And again, these things don't have to go in this order, but I talk about Karl Marx and how the Industrial Revolution started and how it changed the economy. So now we have, poor working people doing all the work, not getting any of the money, the proletariat or the workers. And then we get the rich capitalists who have all the money, and talk about how he predicted there would be a violent revolution that would overthrow the governments. And we would now have a new equal government and equal system, economic system, and where everyone is equal, but it's going to take us a while to get there, right? So that's in a nutshell what he believed, but his beliefs were set off by the Industrial Revolution. There were socialist experiments before him, like the Shakers, for instance. The Shakers were socialists. They believe you should share all your things. But the Shakers didn't say everybody had to be it because the government was going to take over and make you be it. The Shakers said, you just join us if you want to. We don't think the government has to do it. That's what made Marx and communism different. Marx said the government's going to do it and everybody's going to do it. There's no choice in the matter. The early Christians were socialists / communists. The early Christians in Acts said, we're going to share everything equally, right? But you joined them to do it. They didn't say the government should make everybody do it. That's what made Marx and communism different. So, of course, they have the revolutions. Now, gosh, what's my time? I can already tell I'm going to write. This is one of my favorite songs ever. Here's the words, and I'm going to play a little bit of it. Now, this was the communist theme song of the Communist International Party. It was originally written in French, but Billy Bragg, who is a native Cockney Londoner, made this album called the Internationale. That's the name of an album, and it's also the name of a song. And so here's the link to the Billy Bragg version in English. I'm going to play a little bit of it. You get it in your head and it will not go away.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants feed your minds. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, you have nothing, you have no rights. Let grace this ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The international garden unites the world in song. So comrades, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race.
So I'm going to stop there, but this is the Come Brothers and Sisters. Of course, that's the chorus. But I have the words up and I pause it. And so we talk about the victims of oppression were the workers in the factories, they're the proletariat. We talked how don't cling so hard to your possessions. In other words, in the communist revolution, you're going to give everything up and then everybody's going to get equally taken care of. Of course, it sounds good. It never actually happened when the Soviet Union or China did it. Let racist ignorance be ended. In other words, the Communist Party of the Russian Revolution became the Comintern, Communist International, and they said, we're going to erase all the lines between countries and we're going to be one big communist world. So freedom is a privilege unless everybody gets it. In other words, right now, just the rich people have freedom because all of us working people are all down here working and freedom doesn't matter. So we talk about these, this brothers and sisters is how the communists refer to each other. We're going to unite the world. We're going to rally, right? Unite the human race. Then it gets more violent here. We're going to end the vanity of nations. And of course, that's what the Communist International Party wanted to do. That's why it's so threatened the United States and other countries during the Cold War, because they wanted to erase political lines. So the last verse is the final drama in the streets and in the fields. Streets represent the sickle on the Soviet flag. No, streets are the hammer, the industrial workers. Fields are the sickle on the Soviet flag, right? The farmers. And we're going to have this violent revolution. But then this last verse, be inspired because change will not come from above. And I don't care whether you're a communist, a socialist or not. I love that line because it is so true in most cases. Anyway, love the song. Whether you're a communist or not, great tune. So then when I play the last verse, and I've done this for years and years, I say, okay, everybody, let's sing it. And some of them will, and some of them won't. And I belt it out at the top of my lungs, and I don't sing very well, but it's a memory they can't ever unremember. And it's a lot of fun, but one of the most rewarding moments of my career was in high school, and we went through this and we looked at that song, and later we were watching a short video about the Russian Revolution, and one of my students, and let's just say he wasn't the star academic pupil, he said, oh my gosh, that's that song you played for us about communism. And they were playing the Internationale in the background of the video. So it's like, oh my gosh, they're putting pieces together. So I still, and then that whole album is songs about communism. There's one about the communists and America's efforts in the 80s to stop the spread of communism in Central America. So they're really good songs to teach this theme. We look at some cartoons that go with this. So see, here's all the countries that were communist. But then, of course, the Cold War ended. So now we're down to China, North Korea, and Cuba. And of course, these guys, these two, Castro and the chubby North Korean young guy, this is his dad. They're dead now, so the cartoon's a little old. We look at this one, and I have students explain it, discuss it and explain it. Unregulated capitalism and regulated capitalism. And this is my favorite of all. What? You want a public option? Are you a socialist? Of course, the public option in this cartoon, because it's older, was actually the option under Hillary Clinton during the Clinton administration to have a public option for medical insurance. But anyway, so I talk about these scare tactics and how people throw out that word to scare people when it's really not a bad word. And I'm going to speed up a little here. Forms of government, and I found this on Wikipedia. Remember, Wikipedia is not always bad. I love this because it showed, now I've shifted here, right? I just shifted because once you do the economic systems, you need to go back and discuss or review what they know about the forms of government because they're mix and match, right? So this shows these forms of government and what is used around the world. But I love this. This chart represents de jure form of government. In other words, what's on paper, not what they actually do. So notice the Soviet Union is a semi-presidential republic. Yeah, whatever, right? Putin's a dictator, right? So this might introduce your forms of government. I love this chart. Who rules? Anarchy, nobody. So if you haven't taught it, this is a good place to teach it or review it. And then fascism, which is the hardest thing in the world to explain because you can't understand World War II without it. And a lot of students think fascism, they mix up fascism and communism, and they are totally different. This is a definition that I formulated over time as I explored students' misunderstandings. It's a system of government and social organization both. It's not an economic system. it's just hard to explain, but one of the cores is extreme nationalism and encourages racism to distract from the real problems of the nation. Their economic system is mixed usually. It just depends on, you can own your own business if you support the dictator. And Hitler let lots of companies and individuals keep their businesses as long as they produced what he wanted for the military or whatever. So it's a hard thing to explain. We look at the leaders. And if you haven't watched Rick Steves, The Story of Fascism in Europe, it's an hour-long video. So I don't know if you could get your students to watch all of it. But if you haven't watched that, it is the best simple explanation in history of fascism I've ever seen. And, you know, he's the tour guy, right? But it is really, really good. And it's free on his website. And they run it on PBS all the time. So I highly recommend that. And I'll tell you, with the college students, I always put fascism on the midterm and the final. And even though I said this is going to be on the test, they just have a hard time getting their minds around fascism because it's a mix of things. And I put this up, but I put a warning before it. I say, I'm not saying yes or no, but these are cartoons that were published in Trump's administration. So if we look at this definition, right, here's the definition. Is he a fascist? And this is where we can explore symbols of Nazi Germany and Trump's beliefs and how cartoonists are on one side or the other. Again, this could be pretty controversial, so you decide. And then we look at, this is from the Trump election, the first one, not the second one that he lost. And this is a social media post. And so I'm trying to show them how there's these loaded words: democratic socialism, system of government, economic system, plutocratic fascism. Well, plutocratic is a system, a government system. Fascism is too. Really doesn't mention an economic system exactly. See, and so I try to give these examples from current social media. And then of course we come back to, what is the United States? Well, we're a republic or a representative democracy, and we have we call it free market, but it's more mixed. And then I actually, if you want it, email me and I can send you this little activity that has examples of other governments and how they're mix and match. So for instance, Switzerland is both a representative republic and a direct republic at the same time, and they have a mixed economic system, right? So there's lots of mix and match options around the world you can look at. And then we get to the Cold War. Oh my gosh. And that's me. And look, I'm hanging out with Lenin and Stalin. Actually, a few years ago, I got to go to Finland, and there is a Lenin museum in Tampere, Finland. And I went. It's a really small museum, but he spent time there when the Russians were periodically throwing him out. And so they had these life-size models. And look at this. Stalin was a really short man. You would think a man that could kill that many people would be taller than that. I don't know. So we look at the Cold War. But before we start it, you have to review, because again, you know this, they mix up fascism and communism. And because they mix up the fact that the Soviet Union was with us in World War II, right? But then we're against them in the Cold War. That really confuses them. So again, I have a reading, and that's in the folder that I give them, but I'll get to that. We look at the Iron Curtain. This is a really good short video of Winston Churchill's speech that you can stop and explain. We look at the Truman Doctrine, always good to show the map. We look at the Marshall Plan, and then NATO, of course, and we talk about NATO. And then I love this, connections to modern world, is the Cold War still going on. This is 1990 NATO. This is 2022 NATO. So NATO's still around. The Warsaw Pact isn't. Most of the ones in the Warsaw Pact are trying their best to join NATO, and poor Belarus and Ukraine. Of course, we know Ukraine's just kind of stuck there in the middle, right? So big changes. And you notice Russia's still the enemy, but they're not communists like they were during the Warsaw Pact. Then, because I'm going to have a lesson with lots of political cartoons, and because political cartoons are so integral to the 20th century, and because none of them make sense unless you know the people and symbols, I have this next activity. Now, these cartoons I actually took from National Archives website, and I'll show you that reference in a minute. But this is in your, this is in your folder. I give them these pictures, and I had to cut it off down here. They also have a list of the names, and in groups or pairs, they try to match the person or symbol with the thing in the list. And they can Google these, right? They can look them up, and they try to match them, because if you don't know these faces, you don't understand the political cartoons. If you don't know the symbols, you don't understand the political cartoons. So for instance, so if you look in your folder, the answers, the worksheet and the answers are there. So if you want to use it, or they're all Word documents, so you can change them, add things, take away things. Then I have a set of cartoons that I have them analyze in small groups or pairs, and I have all the cartoons in this PowerPoint. And I'm sorry, I used to have a PDF of all the cartoons, and it was in my Blackboard site, but EKU cut me off from that when I retired. But you can get them here from the PowerPoint, and then they're in your folder. There's a worksheet that the groups can use, and I assign them one or two, each group one or two of the cartoons. Here's another activity with good cartoons, and that's the one I mentioned. It's on the archives website. So I'll go through them real quick. But they're all from a book that I still have the book. I bought it years ago in the 90s. I use these with high school students. You know, some of them are harder than others, but every one of these reinforces the symbols that we discussed. There's the French chicken. There's Stalin. There's the hammer and sickle. Here's Stalin, hammer, sickle, England, John Bull. Every one of these reinforces the lessons that we had looked at earlier. Here's the Russian bear. Of course, here's a Soviet soldier. You know that because he's got the symbol. There's Hungary, one of the satellite nations. This one's really good. This one's about the American policy of whether we should aid Europe and the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine. This is the Iron Curtain chomping down on Czechoslovakia that tried to revolt with the torch of freedom. This one's how the Soviets made how the Soviets and Stalin made all the European countries like each other. And this one is about Germany being split. Here's another one about the Berlin blockade and the Russian bear, the American eagle. This one's real good about how in the Cold War, we were competing for influence over the Middle Eastern countries. Here's Khrushchev and the Soviet science lead in the 50s. And here's Khrushchev again. And, you know, he's easy to mix up with Truman. A lot of students will. And then I get to the last question. Is the Cold War over? And these are 4 cartoons that I found, 3 cartoons and a map about the current situation in the Ukraine. Russia's not communist anymore, but they've become the same threat in many ways that they were in the Cold War era. They're a dictatorship, not on paper, but in reality. And Putin is doing many of the exact same things that the Soviet Union did when they took over Eastern Europe. And he's trying to retake the territory that used to belong to the Soviet Union and using many of those Soviet era tactics. So, of course, I love the way that they represent Putin. He's always got his shirt off. And of course, here's a poor, tired, wore out Uncle Sam. And there's the bear, the Russian bear. And this one, what do you see? The past. Right. So I don't know. What do you think? I mean, should we still call it the Cold War, or do we need to give it a new name? Feel free to type, throw in there. Or I'm coming close. Feel free to add questions, comments. Yeah, someone suggest a new name. This is totally unrelated, but Kay mentioned something at the beginning that made me think the Crucible is related to the Cold War. And did you know that this 1960 version of Spartacus, it was about the Cold War, the House for Un-American Activities and Hearings. And so I love Spartacus, the old movie, and especially the scene where the it says, "No, I'm Spartacus, I'm Spartacus." But it's, it parallels. It's a historical story about a modern or a relatively modern event. So if you look, there's some extra things in the folder for today, and I think I might have left some out. There's the blog. If for some reason the blog website about explaining capitalism, socialism, and communism that I wrote disappears, there's a document there with it and the chart. There's a reading about the overview of the economic systems, the conservative liberal note-taking guide. There's also a Cold War reading guide with two things that I put a PDF of them, but you can also give them a link. They're still on the web that students could read or you could adapt. And then there was a preview activity that I think Kay sent out, but it's a really good primary source readings about, and let me pull one up, about the Cold War. One of the funniest ones, and let's see if I can make this work. I'll show it to you in just a second. And then last but not least, I have a YouTube channel, and someday when I can make myself do something academic again, I'll probably add some more. But I do have one about the kitchen debate in 1959 when Nixon went to the Soviet Union and debated capitalism with Khrushchev. And there's a really good American experience about Khrushchev visiting the United States. But I'm traveling through time and talk about the kitchen debate. So there's the link. And then always I have the blog and the website, but I have to say I'm sadly behind and need to catch up on that. But let me end this and let me show you the best of the, okay, can you see that Google window?
Yes.
Okay, this one is just a hoot. This was put out by the Un-American Activities, the House Un-American Activities Committee, and it's Communism and Education, 1,000 Things You Should Know. And I used to go over this with my high school social studies method students at Eastern. I had not discovered this when I was teaching high school. Of course, you couldn't find everything in the world online back then like you can today. And this is a hoot. And it's warning educators about all the dangers of communism. And while you may not agree with communism today, you will agree that some of this is a little over the top, just like the House Un-American Activities was. The other things I included in here, if you didn't have a chance to look at it, this one's pretty good. And I try to do them all education related. This is another pamphlet, and this is by the Communist Party of Great Britain. I couldn't find anything similar. And it's about education and if you're communist, what education should do. So it's pretty good because it's like the opposite of the one I just showed you. There's also, and this one's by the National Education Association and the American Legion. So NEA and the American Legion worked together in the 50s, I think, 60s. And this is a guide to teaching about communism during the Cold War in the early 60s. And it's not too long, it's 19 pages. Now, probably be too much for students, but it's pretty interesting. This could have been the guidelines you were given. And then I have some links to videos, and these are sort of fun too. They're all by the National Education Program from the 50s and early 60s. And they're videos warning you about the communist threat and what you can do about it and why one's better than communism is better than capitalism. So some really good domestic resources, but the most fun one is this one. And they even identify, sorry if I'm making you dizzy here, they even identify schools in America that are aligned with the communists, and you will recognize some of them because they're still around. Here's are there communist schools in this country? And they list the ones that are. And there's one on here, and
Were there any from Kentucky?
Well, no, I doubt it. Just like today. There's one on here that I thought was still, maybe not. It's the activist school in Tennessee, but maybe that's from something else. But yeah, they even point out some evil communist schools. So anyway, here's some subversive organizations of youth. The Southern Negro Youth Congress is communist. Think there's a little racism there? Probably. Anyway, so some fun resources. So I have taken my time up and more.
Yes,
But
Dr. Reeser, are all of those resources that you just showed us linked on that agenda? Or they're in that drive?
They're in a document on the preview. So if you look at the agenda here, I'll pull up the agenda. Let me get, they're on the preview link, but here's the document. It's in there. It looks like this. There's the agenda, and you can go right there to the preview, and that's one of the documents in there. Communism and Education During the Cold War, Primary Sources. So hopefully, I said this has been a little different because you know the Cold War content, folks. You're smart, you're teachers, but hopefully this will give you some ideas on how to ingrain what the meanings of communism, socialism, capitalism, all three economic systems, and also liberal and conservative, so students can really understand those, so that you'll have that foundation, not just for everything else that you teach for the rest of the year, but also for their lives. And hopefully it will help them interpret social media so these words aren't scary to them, so they know what they mean and they can pull apart some of these crazy social media posts and political ads that we see all the time. Questions, comments, ideas? Somebody said, yeah, we probably need a new name, but I'm not sure what it would be.
They said a new era of the Cold War.
New era.
We're really big on sequels. Maybe it needs to be Cold War II.
Yeah, I don't know.
A new dawning. You know, like the Star Wars themes. I don't know.
Yeah. So thanks, folks.
Thank you, Dr. Reeser. I'm going to turn off the recording now.